Neville Goddard Lecture. Outer world responds to imaginal acts. All that you behold, though it appears without, it is within in your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow. William Blake. You cannot conceive of something that is not already contained within you. If you imagine it and enter into that state as though it were true, the outer world will respond to bear witness of this imaginal activity within you. Listen to these words. This is the 20th chapter of John. And Peter went into the tomb, and he saw the linen clothes lying, and the napkin, which was on his head, lying not with the linen clothes, but rolled up in a place by itself. Well, you would wonder, why on earth would you put that into a story that is so dramatic, so altogether marvelous? Why would you tell it? You see the linen clothes and you see the napkin, and they are not together, they are separated, and he finds this in the tomb. Now we are told that when he was brought to the tomb was called Golgotha, which means the skull. There he was first crucified, and there he was buried. So, Peter and his partner, when they went in, they did not see the one that was put there, but they found the linen clothes, and they found the napkin, and they were not together. The napkin was rolled up in a place by itself. If you take it as a secular story, you will think a man died. They had him in linen clothes, and they covered his face with a cloth called a napkin. And then when they went in the third day, the tomb was empty. But that is not the symbolism of Scripture. The linen clothes represent the physical body, and that's what they found. They found the physical body, the garment that he wore, but they did not find him. You would say then he was dead. No, that is not the story that is being told. They found the napkin. In ancient times, the word napkin had a far wider range of meaning than it has today. We have a dinner napkin, a cocktail napkin. We also have today a sanitary napkin, but this was a different kind of napkin. This napkin symbolizes the placenta, the afterbirth. If you know the true symbolism of Scripture, it is telling you a birth took place and it came from this. For the napkin symbolizes simply the afterbirth, and here is the body that you found. Well now, something was born. When you see the story in John, who is the most profound of all the New Testament writers, you see the birth, and then you see who Mary is. Mary was the skull. Mary was that womb in which God entered. Or as Blake said, God himself entered death's door with those who enter and lays down in the grave with them, in visions of eternity, until they awake and see Jesus and the linen clothes lying which the females had woven for them. Well, my mother wove this garment, this fleshy garment. My mother wove it in her womb. This is the linen cloth that mother wove, and she wove it for me. When it came forward, then following it came the placenta. The uterus had to expel it. It had to be discharged. It was no part of her. Here is the napkin telling that something entirely different took place. Some birth, some unusual birth, something that was not known to man before, and it took place in the skull. The drama begins in the skull and ends there. God actually became as we are that we may be as he is, and he entered death's door, which is my skull, your skull. He enters and then has visions of eternity, and all these horrible visions that you and I have which come forward as physical effects in our world. Wars, famines, convulsions, everything in the world you and I imagine or it couldn't happen. So when I imagine a state and I find a response coming from without, I have found who God is. All things are made by him, and without him is not anything made that is made. John 1:3. But he also has to have one who will do all of his will. Then I find that 500 different people, male and female, were responsive to my imaginal act, and they seemed to be the instrument through which it became visible in my world. Then I have found David. For if David is a man after my own heart, who will do all my will, then humanity is David. I play all the parts, and you will play all the parts. Your presence here tells me you have played them, or you wouldn't be here, because no one comes unto me save my Father calls him, and I and my Father are one. You have played everything in the world, for everything is contained within you, and you can't conceive of a plot in the world that is not now a reality in you, but you need not animate it. If you enter into that state and assume that you are it, well then not one power in the world could stop that from responding. And if it takes a dozen or 10 dozen or 1,000 men and women to respond to bear witness to that active state within you, they must respond, for they will do your will. So he creates humanity. It's part of the structure of the universe, and it's dead. Now he animates it. It is said, he breathed upon them. The word breath and the word spirit are one and the same in Hebrew and in Greek. So to breathe upon is simply to possess it. I possess the body, and as I possess it, spirit enters it, that is, animating it. But I am now in a body that is dead. I must now go through the horrors of the journey, and when I reach the very end of it, then I begin to awake. And I awake just where I started the dream. I awake in Golgotha, the skull, the tomb, which is the skull of man. That's where I entered, and that's where I awake. And when I awake, I emerge from it. I look back at that which I occupied for 6,000 years, and it is ghastly pale. It's the linen clothes that my mother wove in her womb. And then I depart, leaving, and the body expels that which is the napkin. And I come out, and others come to find me. They find only the discarded body, and they find now the thing which symbolizes my birth. It's only a symbol of my birth from above. But if you think in terms of one little being called Jesus Christ, you miss it completely. That is not the mystery. Jesus Christ is your own wonderful human imagination, and that is God himself. When you imagine a state, wait for the response. It will come. Everything will come. It will come just like any sound that you make will bring a response, because in your world there is something that is attuned to the note that you struck. It will come. Everyone in the world will play the part they must play if I remain faithful to any state into which I enter. You are God. You are not some little worm coming out of the slime, moving from there into some little bird, and from the bird into something else, then something else, and finally man. No. All of this is part of the structure of the universe. You descended into man and animated man, all of us. And no more can descend into humanity than the number of the sons of God, and it takes all the sons of God to make God. The word is plural, the Elohim. These are the gods, the sons of God that together make up the I Am. And you can't have more in this world than there are sons of God. So every child born of woman could only be born and be animated because a son of God, an ancestral being, is in it and animating it, controlling it, and putting it through all the paces by putting himself through. And in the end, he extracts himself from that body. That body was his David, his beloved, because the whole vast world is David, because the world has to respond to his will. Someone now sitting in a dungeon feeling abused by some intense imagination entering into the image conceived by her is causing disturbances in the world. She is completely unknown, buried in a dungeon, and she is treading the winepress. While completely unseen and unknown by the world, she is causing a response in the whole vast world. Who knows who is actually causing the response today in this conflict, that conflict and the other? No one knows. Some unseen person can be the source of the conflict. We don't really know. And we go forward giving what is called advice, more and more so-called good advice, when Scripture doesn't speak of giving any good advice. It speaks only of giving good news. Go and tell them the good news, that you created it, and you will simply extract yourself from it. And so, you are the immortal being. Don't give any good advice. Let people be just what they want to be. I don't care what they are, let them be. They want to grow beards and long. Well, there was a time that everyone grew a beard. Let him grow his beard, let him grow his moustache, let him do all the things in the world as long as he doesn't interfere with you. As far as you are concerned, if you don't want to grow one, don't grow one. And no one will disturb you if you in your own wonderful way imagine you are free as the wind, and live in that state. And the world will respond to you and treat you with all the respect you do. But if you get entangled in it, trying to work against shadows, for they're all shadows if they respond to my imaginal act, then they're shadows. How can they be causative in my world? If I give them the power of causation, then I'm transferring what rightly belongs to me to them, and they're only shadows. The whole vast world bears witness of the activity taking place within us, and so the whole world only mirrors what I am doing within myself. That's all that it's doing. If I know that, I'm set free. My friend, who is here tonight, gave me a letter last Friday, and she said that she rarely buys a paper, but several weeks ago she bought a Sunday paper, and going through it, she came across a short story of this woman who called herself a great medium, and, naturally, California is going to go right into the Pacific. So, she took all of the members of her family and went off to Spokane. Then she said, weeks went by, and a friend of mine called and she brought in a paper. As I told you, I do not buy papers, and that was simply an occasion when I bought that Sunday paper. So she brought in a paper, and I took the paper and went through the pages, and here I came upon a little news item. The same woman, the same medium who took her family from California and went off to Spokane, died suddenly of a fatal heart attack, aged 29. All right, so California did disappear. As far as she is concerned, her world vanished. She is now in a world like this, but it need not be in her little California. She's in some section of time best suited for the work yet to be done in her, to bring her to the knowledge of who she is. This frightened little thing. So she died at age 29, and she is one of the great soothsayers who has frightened so many in this state. Friends of mine left it, went off to Arizona, but they don't realize you can only take yourself with you. You can go from here to the ends of the earth. If you make your bed in hell, you're still there, because God is there, and you are God. You can't get away from being God, although you may not know that you are. And so if you are afraid here, you're going to be afraid there. So in her case, the fear possessed her. It's like Job, he said, "My fears have come upon me." Job 3:25. He was so afraid he was creating his own disaster, and then it came upon him. Now we are told in the end that it was God who brought it. But in the end he realized who God was. God was himself. He said, "I heard of thee with the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees thee." Now I know, I experienced. I was praying to a God external to myself, and all of my fears came upon me while I pleaded with a God who did not exist to do something about it. In the end, the very last chapter, the 42nd chapter, "I have heard of thee with the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees thee." He now sees the symbol that reveals to him that he is God the Father, and all that he had lost returned to him because it had to return, but it was double. Because when God comes out of this and extracts himself from this fabulous experience, everything that he was is doubled when he comes out. That's the story of Job. Job didn't do anything wrong. He simply imagined the wrong things. It began with the so-called devil. Well, the devil doesn't exist outside of man. The devil is doubt, that's all that it is. Satan is the doubter, and so I doubt the reality of my imaginal acts. All right, so that's Satan. I can't believe in the reality of the unseen imaginal act. Well then don't, but you still will imagine anyway. You will not believe in the reality of this imaginal act, but you'll turn from this, you'll turn to another, because you can't stop imagining, for imagining is God, and imagining animates the world. That is the power of the world. So in the end, I have heard of thee, but I didn't see you. Now my eye sees you, and then all the things that were taken from him are now returned 100-fold. So don't envy anyone, don't condemn anyone, for a judgment is an activity of your own imagination, and with what judgment you judge will be judged on you. You'll fulfill it, so leave them alone. You'll find people always trying to get you into a certain little circle to make you pass an opinion. What do you think of the hippies? What do you think of is one? What do you think of that one? Well, I'm quite sure if any of us had a memory long enough, we could go back and trace everything we now see in the world to some ancestor. If we go back far enough, all were our ancestors. We had hippies, we had thieves, we had murderers, and we had everything. I think it was Lord George when he tried to bring in a change in the land reforms of England, and he got up in the House where he was Prime Minister, and he was trying to bring about some reform of the land reform. He turned to the opposition, and he said that every Englishman today, in order to trace ownership of his land, must go back to the ancestor who first stole it. Well, he got a lovely reaction on that, because you can't go back far enough unless you find the one who stole it. We speak of kings today. No one was originally born a king. He had to steal that position and maintain it by arms because whoever appointed him as king, who appointed anyone in a position of that nature, you go back far enough and they all stole it. So when he was trying to bring about land reform in England, he said, "You can lay claim to this land only by going back far enough to find the ancestor who stole it. Now you don't have to go back and change anything. Leave it just as it is. He wants 1,000 acres, let him have it. 100,000 acres, let him have it. You are satisfied with just simply living in a lovely apartment. All right, take the apartment. But you will say, well, I can't afford it. If you say that you can't afford it, that's your imaginal act. I would suggest to you, when you say that you can't afford it, this night to sleep in that apartment, mentally, as though you occupied it, with all the funds necessary to pay for it. And in a way you do not know, the world will respond, and you will get the necessary funds to pay for it. If you don't want that, and you want to own your own home, then sleep in a place as though you owned it, and the necessary funds will come. Because the world only responds, it doesn't cause. It responds to your own imaginal act, for there's only one God, and that God is in you as your own wonderful human imagination. Now, before you judge it, may I ask you to try it. If you try it, you can't fail. And if you really try it and you prove it in the testing, well then, you become one who will spread the good news to your brothers and tell everyone that you meet how things work in this world. So, they will not feel, well, I didn't have it at birth. I didn't have the good chances as a child. I didn't have the parents who had it, the proper education. Forget all of these things and just simply take this principle, and you can't fail. For an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. So, when you know what you want, just assume that you have it, and persist in that assumption as though it were true, mentally seeing the world that you would see if it were true. And as you walk, you are calling a response to it. And eventually, in the not distant future, you will find yourself occupying that state physically in this world. Well, now don't forget it. We go to sleep after we realize our dream and try to hold on to the dream that is now solidly real in our world, and try to protect it with secular means. Don't. Hold on to it only in your imagination, for we are given a warning that this man said, I have all that it takes, more than enough. I will now build bigger barns to house and then take my ease. And the Lord said to him, O fool, tonight your soul is required of thee. You don't have to hold on to anything. Hold on only in your own wonderful human imagination. If something is taken from you, all right, somewhere along the way you allowed it by assuming that you had lost it, toying with the idea, what would it be like if it were true that I had lost it? And then you dropped it, forgetting that you did that, and then comes the moment that you lose it. If you want to lose it, all well and good. If you don't, then hold on to your things only in imagination and don't build barns to house them. But don't forget the story of the birth as told in John. They see death, and yet it's only through death that one lives. So, the seed must fall into the ground and die before it is made alive. If it dies, it bears much. If it doesn't fall into the ground, it remains alone. John 12:24. So God dies. Unless I die, thou canst not live. But if I die, I shall arise again, and thou with me. Blake, Jerusalem. Now let us go into the silence. Now, are there any questions, please? A lady asked, if I'm imagining a thing a certain way, and I'm involved with another person who's also imagining about the same thing, but there's a difference in opinion, and they're thinking an opposite way, what's going to happen? Neville. The minute you know that he is doing it in the opposite direction, you've transferred the power that rightly belongs to you to the other. There is no he. He only reflects what you are imagining. But the minute you believe that another has power greater than yourself, you are now dividing the power that is rightly yours and giving it to him. It doesn't really matter what others are thinking. What are you thinking? And so, it is entirely up to you to either believe completely in the unity of God, the oneness of God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, not two. So when they say, if the Lord is one, you say, I am, that's his name forever. He didn't say we are, but I am. So the minute that you say he is doing it, well, you've taken the one grand confession of faith, the Shema, and divided it. That is not the confession of faith. When asked to name the greatest of all commandments, that's what he named. He did not name any of the 10 commandments. He named the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Deuteronomy 6:4. So when I say, well, I'm doing this, and someone tells you, but he is doing the opposite, who is he? He is put into this world to bear witness to all that I do, not to take from me the power that is mine. So he never gave it to another. Let the whole vast world do what they feel like doing. You will find in the end that it's all been resolved. I have heard women say to me, "You know, I want that man and only that man, and I don't want any other man, and don't give me any criticism about it. I want him." I said, "But he's married. It doesn't matter. I want him. The only man." But I've gone to their weddings, and it was not that man. What they really wanted was to be happily married, and they tied it to a man. What they wanted was the state of blissful marriage. I've gone to their weddings, and they always get a little smile on their faces, a little embarrassment, because they know the discussion that they had with me about that man. I'm not speaking of only one woman. I'm speaking of quite a few that I knew back in New York City who had these problems that they had to have that man. And it wasn't that man. And as time went by, they realized that he never could have filled the bill. I know this from experience, so I'm not concerned when they tell me, "Now don't try to dissuade from this person. It has to be this person." I'm not interested. Tell me what you want and don't give me all the problems about what's going to stop it. The minute you start that, you are taking the Shema and shattering the entire confession of faith. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And I can't even say we are in that confession. I have to say I am. And when I go to the people and I say that the Lord has sent me, and I say he is the God of our fathers, the God of Abraham, and the God of Jacob, and the God of Isaac, what shall I say? Just say, "I am has sent me unto you." Exodus 3:13. He didn't say, "Go and say we are," like three fathers, one of Abraham, one of Jacob, and one of Isaac, the same one. And his name is I am. So the minute I go out and I say, "You are," that is something that is a shadow, and he is, that's even further away. So, I must walk in the assumption that I am that which I want to be as though I were. And you get closer and closer to that wonderful confession, and you live by it.